Scram, monkey. You lost, boy? This place is for heroes, not whatever you are.
The veteran's fingers stayed pressed on a name.
This place is for heroes.
I served 3 tours.
Sure, pal.
And I'm a 4-star general. Now move your black ass before I move it for you.
The veteran's teenage son stood frozen behind him, hands shaking, phone already recording. What that cop didn't know was that the memorial's keynote speaker, a decorated 3-star general, had just arrived. And he recognized the man in handcuffs immediately. Miles Sullivan woke at 5 in the morning the way he always did on November 11th. No alarm. His body just knew. The house was dark and quiet. A small 2-bedroom place on the east side of Ridgedale, Virginia. Nothing fancy. Clean floors, a kitchen that smelled like coffee grounds and pine sol. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror and splashed cold water on his face. The scar along his left jawline caught the light, a souvenir from an IED blast in the Arghandab Valley, 2009. Most people never ask about it. Miles never offered. He walked down the hallway past a row of framed photos. His unit in Afghanistan, 12 men, arms around each other, dust on their faces, grins that didn't know what was coming. His late wife, Angela, in a yellow sundress, laughing at something off camera. She passed from cancer 3 years ago. And his son Terrence's school portrait. Big eyes, shy smile, looking more like Angela every year. Miles ironed a white shirt on the kitchen counter, pressed the collar flat, laid out his army field jacket on the bed, and ran his thumb over the patches. Then he opened the top drawer of his nightstand and pulled out a small velvet pouch. 2 purple hearts, 1 bronze star with valor. He tucked them inside the jacket's inner pocket, same as every year. Never on the outside, never where anyone could see. Not for show, he said quietly to no one. He made scrambled eggs and toast for Terrence. The boy came down the stairs in jeans and a hoodie, still half asleep. He sat at the table and watched his father move around the kitchen with slow, careful hands. "You okay, Dad?" "Always." Terrence didn't push it. He knew what today meant. He knew his father would barely talk until they got home tonight. He knew about Danny. Miles reached into his jacket and touched the folded letter in the breast pocket. He didn't need to read it. He had memorized every word years ago. But carrying it mattered. It was the last thing Corporal Danny Ames ever wrote. He wrote it the night before a routine patrol that turned into an ambush. Danny didn't make it home. The letter did. They drove to the memorial in Miles's old Chevy pickup. The engine rattled at every stoplight. The heater barely worked. But the truck ran, and it was paid off. And that was enough. Ridgedale Veterans Memorial sat in a small town square park at the center of Main Street. A curved granite wall, about 40 feet long, engraved with over 200 names of local soldiers killed in action. In front of it stood a bronze statue of a kneeling soldier, head bowed, rifle planted in the dirt. Small American flags lined the walkway. Wooden benches flanked each side. The town was already setting up for the official ceremony that afternoon. A podium near the statue, rows of white folding chairs on the grass, a sound system being tested by a volunteer who kept tapping the microphone and saying, "Check, check." But at 7 in the morning, the place was nearly empty. That was the point. Miles came early every single year. He wanted private time with the wall. No speeches, no crowds, just him and the names. Terrence sat on one of the benches about 20 feet back. He pulled out his phone and put in his earbuds. He knew the routine. Give Dad space, wait, be there when he's ready. Miles walked to the wall and found the name. 3rd row from the bottom, near the center. Corporal Daniel R. Ames. He pressed his finger against the cold letters and closed his eyes. Across the street, A police cruiser sat parked along the curb, engine idling. Inside, Officer Craig Dutton leaned back in the driver's seat, scrolling his phone with one hand, holding a gas station coffee with the other. Dutton had pulled the short straw. Event security for the ceremony. Babysitting a park. He was irritated before his shift even started. He glanced up through the windshield and saw two figures at the memorial, a man and a teenager, both black. His eyes narrowed. Dutton set down his coffee. He didn't radio dispatch. He didn't check in with anyone. He opened the cruiser door, adjusted his belt, and started walking toward the memorial with the kind of slow, wide-legged swagger that said one thing clearly: I own this ground. Dutton's boots hit the pavement in a slow, deliberate rhythm, each step louder than the last. He crossed the street without looking and stepped onto the memorial walkway like he was walking into his own living room. Miles heard him coming. He didn't turn around. His finger stayed on Danny's name. Dutton stopped about 6 feet behind him. He didn't say good morning. He didn't say excuse me. He just stood there for a moment, letting the silence do the work. Then he spoke. Park's closed for setup. You need to leave. Miles turned his head slightly, not all the way, just enough to acknowledge the voice. I come here every year at this time. The ceremony isn't until this afternoon. I'll be out of the way before then. His voice was calm, measured, the voice of a man who had given reports under mortar fire and never raised his pitch. Dutton didn't like that. He didn't like calm. Calm from someone like this felt like defiance to him. I didn't ask for your life story. I said leave. Miles turned fully now. He faced Dutton with his hands relaxed at his sides. Open palms, no tension in his shoulders. Everything about his body language said the same thing. I am not a threat. He gestured toward his jacket. The unit patches were still stitched on the shoulder. The U.S. Army tape above the breast pocket was faded but legible. I served, officer. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Some of these names on this wall, I knew them personally. Dutton looked at the jacket the way a man looks at a stain on his shoe. Anybody can buy a jacket at a surplus store for $10. That don't prove nothing. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just asking to stand here for a few more minutes. And I'm telling you the answer is no. The wind picked up. One of the small flags along the walkway bent sideways and snapped back. Somewhere behind them, a volunteer dropped a metal chair leg on concrete, and the clang echoed across the park. Miles took a slow breath. He knew this script. He had lived it before, not in Kandahar, but in parking lots, grocery stores, traffic stops. The specifics changed. The feeling never did. Can I have your badge number, officer? Something shifted in Dutton's face. His jaw went tight. His nostrils flared. The question landed like a personal insult. You don't get to make demands here. I'm the one with the badge. You're the one who needs to start walking. I'm not making demands. I'm asking a question. And I'm giving you an answer. You don't get a badge number. You get a choice. Walk away now, or I make this a whole different kind of morning for you. Dutton stepped closer, close enough that Miles could smell the cheap coffee and cigarette smoke on his breath, close enough to make a point. Let me see your hands. Miles raised both hands slowly, palms open, fingers spread. The universal posture of a man showing he had nothing to hide and nothing to fight with. Both hands where I can see them. Don't move. I'm not moving. Don't talk back either. Terrence stood up from the bench. His earbuds dangled around his neck now. His eyes were wide and locked on the scene in front of him. He had seen videos like this online, hundreds of them. Black men told to stop moving, stop talking, stop breathing too loud. He never thought he'd watch it happen to his own father. Dutton leaned in, his voice dropped low, quiet enough that only Miles could hear. The kind of voice a man uses when he wants to cut someone without leaving a visible wound. "I told you to scram. I don't know what rock you crawled out from under, but this memorial is for people who actually matter, not for some monkey playing dress-up in a dead man's jacket." Miles felt the words hit his chest like shrapnel, not because they were new, because his son was 10 feet away, and the wind was carrying sound. He looked past Dutton's shoulder. Terrence's face had crumbled. The boy's chin was trembling. His hands fumbled with his phone, and he raised it, pointing the camera at the cop's back. Miles wanted to tell him to stop. He wanted to protect him from this. But he also knew this was the world his son lived in, and pretending otherwise was a luxury they couldn't afford. He said nothing. He stood perfectly still, hands up, jaw tight, eyes forward. Dutton pulled his radio from his shoulder clip and keyed the mic. His voice shifted, louder now, official sounding, like he was performing for an audience. "Dispatch, this is Unit 14 at the Veterans Memorial. I've got a suspicious individual here, refusing to comply with lawful orders, requesting backup." The radio crackled. A voice responded with a copy and an ETA. Miles exhaled through his nose. Suspicious individual. He had a name, he had a rank, he had a service record that would fill a binder. And right now, on a police radio, he was a suspicious individual. "Sit down on the ground." Miles looked at him. "Am I being detained?" "You're being told to sit down." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that I said so. Now sit." Miles looked at the cold concrete beneath his boots. He looked at the memorial wall behind him. Danny Ames's name was 2 feet to his right. He thought about what Danny would say if he could see this. He thought Danny would probably tell him to sit, not because it was right, but because standing was how you got killed. So Miles sat. Not because he submitted, because he survived. That was what he was good at. He had done it in firefights, he had done it in hospitals, he had done it in a courtroom fighting the VA for disability benefits they owed him for 3 years. Survival was not the same as surrender, and Miles Sullivan knew the difference better than most men alive. He lowered himself to the ground slowly, hands still visible, back straight, knees bent. He sat on the cold pavement beside the wall where his best friend's name was carved into stone. Dutton stood over him, one hand resting on his holster, not gripping it, just resting, just reminding. The 2 women who had been setting up chairs nearby stood frozen. One of them had a stack of programs in her arms. She held them against her chest like a shield. The other stared at the ground. Neither said a word. A man walking a golden retriever slowed as he passed the walkway. He saw Miles on the ground. He saw the cop looming over him. He pulled the leash and walked faster. Nobody intervened. Nobody spoke up. Nobody did a damn thing. Terrence couldn't take it anymore. "He's a veteran!" His voice cracked. It was the voice of a 16-year-old trying to sound like a man and failing. "He has medals! He served this country! Why are you doing this?" Dutton turned his head toward the boy. Slowly, the way a dog turns toward a sound it doesn't like. "One more word out of you, kid, and you're sitting right next to him. You want that?" Terrence's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Miles spoke. Low, steady. The kind of voice that doesn't ask permission. "Terrence, don't." The boy's lip trembled. Tears welled in his eyes. But he didn't put the phone down. His hands were shaking badly. The footage would be blurry in places, but it was rolling, every second of it. Miles looked up at his son from the ground, and in that moment, the worst part wasn't the concrete under his legs, or the hand on the holster, or the word monkey still ringing in his skull. The worst part was that his 16-year-old son was learning Right here, right now, in real time, exactly what this country thought of them. Dutton reached down and grabbed Miles by the arm. "Stand up, hands on the wall." Miles rose slowly. He placed both palms flat against the granite. His right hand landed directly on Danny Ames's name. He could feel the carved letters pressing into his skin. "I'm going to search you. Don't move. Don't speak." "Am I under arrest?" "You will be if you don't shut your mouth and cooperate." Dutton started patting him down. Rough, deliberate. Not the kind of search you do when you're looking for a weapon. The kind you do when you want someone to feel small. He slapped Miles's sides, ran his hands down both legs, squeezed the pockets of his jeans hard enough to leave marks. Then he reached inside the army field jacket. His fingers found the breast pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, soft from years of handling, creased so many times the fold lines had turned white. Dutton unfolded it. He held it up and squinted at the handwriting. "What's this? Your little love letter?" "That letter was written by a soldier the night before he was killed in action. Please don't." "Oh, a soldier. Right." Dutton read the first line out loud in a mocking, sing-song voice. Then he let out a short laugh through his nose. "This your prop? You carry this around to make people feel sorry for you?" Miles's composure cracked. Just barely. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His fingers curled against the granite. "That man's name is on this wall. He died saving 3 other soldiers. I am asking you, please, do not disrespect that letter." Dutton held the letter out to one side. Then he opened his fingers and let it fall. It floated down and landed in a shallow puddle at the base of the wall. The ink started bleeding immediately. 16 years of careful preservation, undone in 2 seconds by a man who didn't care. Miles looked down at it. His whole body shifted forward. Dutton put his boot on the letter, pressed it flat into the dirty water. "I'll tell you when you can pick it up." Terrence made a sound, a small, strangled noise, half gasp, half sob. The phone in his hands shook violently, but he kept it raised. He kept recording. More people were arriving now. The setup crew had grown to 8 or 9. A man carrying a box of small flags stopped dead in his tracks when he saw a black man with his hands on the memorial wall and a cop standing over a piece of paper in a puddle. 2 of them pulled out their phones. They started recording from different angles. One of them was close enough to pick up audio. Across the park, a white news van pulled into the side lot. The door slid open and Denise Coleman stepped out. Navy blazer, press badge clipped to her lapel, hair pulled tight in a bun. She was there to scout the location for her afternoon live segment on the ceremony. She saw the scene from 60 yards away. A cop, a black man against the wall, a teenager crying. She didn't need to hear the words to understand what she was looking at. She tapped her cameraman on the shoulder and pointed. He lifted the camera onto his shoulder and hit record. The red light blinked on. Dutton didn't notice any of it. He was fully locked in. The rest of the world had disappeared. There was only him, his badge, and the man he had decided didn't belong here. He reached back into Miles's jacket and found the inner pocket. His fingers closed around something metal. He pulled out the velvet pouch, opened it, and dumped the contents into his palm. 2 purple hearts. 1 bronze star with valor. He held them up and turned them over like he was inspecting cheap coins at a flea market. "Purple heart, right," he snorted. "And I bet this one's for bravery or whatever." He tossed them onto the nearest bench. They landed with a dull clink against the wooden slats. One of the purple hearts slid to the edge and almost fell off. "You probably bought those online. $40 on eBay. I've seen guys like you before. Stolen valor, fake stories, begging for handouts. Miles closed his eyes. He could feel his heartbeat in his temples. He could feel the engraved letters of Danny's name under his right palm. He could hear his son crying behind him. But he didn't move. He didn't swing. He didn't shout. Because Miles Sullivan knew something Craig Dutton would never understand. Reacting was what they wanted. Reacting was the trap. Every black man in America learned that lesson. Some in classrooms, some in living rooms, and some in the back of police cruisers with broken ribs and no witnesses. Miles had learned it in all three. Dutton grabbed his wrists and pulled them behind his back. The click of handcuffs was sharp and metallic in the cold air. "You're done here." He shoved Miles away from the wall. Miles stumbled one step, caught himself, and straightened his back. Dutton grabbed his elbow and started marching him toward the cruiser. Miles spoke. Loud, clear, projected. Not for Dutton. For every phone and camera he knew was pointed at him. "I am not resisting. I am a United States Army veteran. I am unarmed. I am compliant. I have committed no crime. You're trespassing is what you are. This is a public memorial. And I'm telling you your visit is over." They walked past the bench where the medals lay, past the puddle where Danny's letter was dissolving into nothing, past the row of small flags fluttering along the walkway. Miles turned his head as they passed the wall one last time. His eyes found the name. Corporal Daniel R. Ames. He held his gaze there for as long as he could. Then the angle changed and the name was gone. Terrence followed them, phone still up, tears streaming down both cheeks. He wasn't making a sound anymore. He had gone quiet the way children go quiet when something inside them breaks. Dutton opened the back door of the cruiser and put his hand on top of Miles's head, the way they do on television, pushing down to clear the doorframe. Miles ducked. He lowered himself into the back seat. The plastic was cold through his jeans. The cage between the front and back seats smelled like stale sweat and disinfectant. He sat there, hands cuffed behind his back, staring straight ahead. And then he heard it. Engines, multiple engines, coming from the east entrance of the parking lot. A convoy of 3 black SUVs rolled in slowly. Small military flags mounted on the front fenders, the kind that only fly for senior officers. The vehicles stopped in a neat row near the podium area. Doors opened. 2 military police officers stepped out first, dress uniforms crisp, postures rigid. Then an aide with a leather briefcase. Then another aide. And then, from the second vehicle, a man emerged who changed everything. General Raymond Hollister, 3 stars on each shoulder, full Army dress uniform, silver hair cut regulation short, a chest full of ribbons, and a face carved from decades of command. He was here early, same reason as Miles. He wanted time alone at the wall before the ceremony. He wanted to touch the names of men he had sent into battle and never brought home. He stepped onto the walkway. He surveyed the scene, the cruiser with its back door open, a black man sitting in the back seat in handcuffs, a teenager crying nearby, a cop adjusting his belt like nothing was wrong. Then his eyes found the man in the back seat, and he stopped walking. His face changed. Recognition hit him like a bullet. He knew that face. He knew that scar along the jawline. He knew those eyes. The last time he had seen them, they were staring through dust and smoke in the Arghandab Valley, and the man behind them was carrying 2 wounded soldiers on his back. General Hollister didn't hesitate. He walked straight past Dutton like the man wasn't even there. His boots struck the pavement with the sharp, measured cadence of someone who had spent 40 years giving orders that no one questioned. His aides fell in behind him. The 2 military police officers flanked wide, eyes scanning, hands clasped behind their backs. Dutton noticed them too late. He turned from the cruiser and saw a 3-star general in full dress uniform walking directly toward him, or rather, directly past him, and his mouth fell open slightly. His hand dropped from his belt. Hollister reached the cruiser. He stopped in front of the open back door and looked at Miles Sullivan sitting on the cold plastic seat with his hands cuffed behind his back. For a moment, neither man spoke. Miles looked up. His eyes were red but dry. He recognized Hollister immediately. The silver hair was new, the stars were new, but the jawline and the way he stood, feet planted, shoulders square, chin level, that hadn't changed in 20 years. Hollister stepped back 1 pace. He straightened his spine. He brought his right hand up slowly and held it at the brim of his cover. He saluted. A 3-star general of the United States Army in full dress uniform, saluting a man in handcuffs in the back of a police cruiser. He held it. 3 seconds. 5. 7. His aides snapped to attention. The military police officers did the same. The entire parking lot went silent. The volunteers stopped moving. The woman with the programs pressed her hand over her mouth. Terrence lowered his phone an inch, staring. Hollister's voice carried across the memorial like a cannon shot. Sergeant First Class Miles Sullivan, 2nd Battalion, 5th Infantry. The last time I saw you, you were carrying 2 wounded men through enemy fire in the Arghandab Valley, under conditions that would have broken most soldiers I've ever commanded. You saved 6 lives that day. 3 of them were men under my direct command. He paused. His eyes didn't move from Miles. You were awarded the Bronze Star with Valor for that action. I personally signed the recommendation. Then he turned. Slowly. The way a man turns when he wants every syllable of what comes next to land like a hammer. He looked at Dutton. Take those handcuffs off this man. Right now. Dutton's face had gone white. Not pale. White. The color of paper. The color of a man watching his entire world tilt sideways. Sir, This individual was trespassing, and he refused to— I didn't ask you what he did. I told you to remove the handcuffs. Do it now, or I will have my MPs do it for you, and I promise you that conversation will go very differently. Dutton's hands were shaking. He fumbled with the key ring on his belt. It took him 3 tries to find the right key. He reached into the back seat and unlocked the cuffs. They fell away from Miles's wrists with a click that echoed across the silence. Miles brought his hands forward. He rubbed the red marks on his wrists slowly. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He stepped out of the cruiser, stood upright, shoulders back. The posture came from a place deeper than muscle memory. It came from 20 years of training and a lifetime of refusing to be made small. Hollister looked at him. Something passed between them. Not a conversation, not a gesture. Just the kind of understanding that only exists between men who have bled in the same dirt. Then Hollister looked down. He saw the puddle at the base of the memorial wall. He saw the letter. Soaked. Ink bleeding, edges torn from a boot print. He walked over and bent down on one knee. A 3-star general kneeling in a puddle, carefully lifting a ruined piece of paper from the ground. He read the name at the bottom. His face tightened. His throat moved. Danny Ames. His voice was quiet now, almost private. I remember him. He was 23. He held the letter with both hands, gently pressing the water out against his thigh. Then he stood and carried it back to Miles. Danny was one of the best soldiers I ever saw. I'm sorry this happened to his letter. And I'm sorry this happened to you. Miles took the letter. His fingers trembled slightly as he folded it, carefully, along the old crease lines, and slipped it back into his breast pocket. Thank you, sir. Hollister nodded. Then he turned back to the bench where the medals lay. He picked up both Purple Hearts and the Bronze Star. He looked at them in his palm for a moment. "You never did wear these where people could see them." "They're not for show, sir." "No, they're not." Hollister paused. "But today, maybe they should be." He stepped forward and pinned each medal to the outside of Miles's jacket. One Purple Heart on the left breast, the second beside it, the Bronze Star above them both. His hands moved with precision, the way a man pins medals when he has done it 1,000 times at 1,000 ceremonies. When he finished, he stepped back and looked at Miles. Miles looked down at his own chest. For the first time in years, the medals were visible. And for the first time that morning, something broke behind his eyes. Terrence ran to his father. He threw his arms around him and buried his face in the faded jacket. Miles wrapped one arm around the boy and held on tight. He didn't say anything. He just held his son. Hollister's aide had already made the call. 17 minutes later, a second police cruiser pulled into the lot. Captain Brendan Nolan stepped out. She was a compact woman with short gray hair and a face that didn't waste time on expressions it didn't mean. 26 years on the force. She had buried 2 officers, fired 9, and never lost a second of sleep over any of it. She walked past the volunteers, past the camera crews, past the military police. She stopped in front of Dutton and said one word. "Phone." Dutton blinked. "Ma'am?" "Your phone. Now. And your body cam footage. I want everything from the last hour." Dutton reached for his phone with stiff fingers and handed it over. Nolan didn't look at it. She passed it to a sergeant behind her. Then she turned to Terrence. "Son, I need to see your video." Terrence looked at his father. Miles nodded. The boy handed over his phone. Nolan held it in both hands and pressed play. She watched the entire recording without moving, without blinking. Her face tightened with each passing minute. The slur, the letter in the puddle, the boot on the paper, the medals tossed on the bench, the handcuffs, the shove against the wall. When the video ended, she looked up at Dutton. Her voice was flat and cold, the kind of cold that doesn't come from anger, but from disgust held on a very short leash. "Badge. Weapon. Now." Dutton's mouth opened. "Captain, if you'd let me explain." "I watched 4 minutes of footage, Dutton. There is nothing you can say in any number of minutes that will undo what I just saw." She held out her hand. Dutton unclipped his badge from his chest. He pulled his service weapon from the holster and handed it over, barrel pointed down. His hands were trembling badly enough that Nolan had to steady the gun as she took it. "You are suspended effective immediately. Full pay pending investigation, which, based on what I just watched, will not take long. Do not contact this man. Do not contact his son. Do not speak to the press. Go home and call your union rep. You're going to need one." Dutton's face twisted. The arrogance was gone. What replaced it was something uglier, the panicked desperation of a man who could feel the ground disappearing beneath him. He tried one more time. He stepped toward Miles. His voice came out cracked and rushed. "Look, man, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know about the general. If I had known—" Miles turned to face him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He just looked at Dutton the way you look at something that finally makes sense after years of not understanding. "That's the problem. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me like a human being." Dutton had no answer for that. His mouth moved, but nothing came out. The sentence hung in the air like smoke, visible to everyone, impossible to wave away. A uniformed officer took Dutton by the elbow and guided him to the second cruiser. He was placed in the passenger seat, not the back, not yet. But the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had put Miles in the back of a cruiser was now being driven away in one. The small crowd that had gathered watched him go. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody looked sympathetic. That afternoon, the Veterans Day ceremony went ahead as planned, but the crowd was 3 times larger than expected. Word had already spread on social media. The videos were everywhere. People came who had never attended the ceremony before. They came because they were angry. They came because they needed to see something good happen in the same place where something terrible had. General Hollister delivered his keynote address. Halfway through, he folded his prepared remarks and set them aside. He told the story of Sergeant First Class Miles Sullivan, his 3 tours, his wounds, his Bronze Star action in the Arghandab Valley, his work housing homeless veterans through his nonprofit, and what had happened to him that very morning on this very ground. Then he said, "Miles, would you please stand?" Miles stood. The medals caught the afternoon sun. Terrence stood beside him, shoulders pulled back, chin up, looking more like his father than he ever had. The crowd rose, every single person, hundreds of them. The applause started slow and built until it filled the entire square. Hollister waited for it to fade. Then he said quietly into the microphone, "This is who we honor today. Not ranks, not titles. The character of the men and women who wore the uniform, and the dignity they carry long after they take it off." The video hit the internet that evening. By midnight, it had been viewed 2 million times. Denise Coleman aired her footage on the 10 o'clock news. She didn't editorialize. She didn't need to. She let the footage speak. 4 unbroken minutes of a cop humiliating a decorated veteran at a war memorial on Veterans Day. The crawl at the bottom of the screen read, "Ridgedale officer suspended after confrontation with black combat veteran at memorial." By morning, every major network had picked it up. Cable news ran it on a loop. The clip of Dutton tossing the Purple Hearts onto the bench played over and over. Slow motion, zoomed in, the medals tumbling through the air like discarded bottle caps. The clip of General Hollister saluting a man in handcuffs played right after it. The contrast was devastating. Social media did what social media does. It turned a local incident into a national conversation in under 12 hours. The hashtag Miles Sullivan trended for 3 straight days. Veterans posted photos of their own service records with the caption, "Am I next?" Civil rights organizations issued statements. The American Legion released a formal condemnation within 24 hours. The Ridgedale Police Department had no choice. They launched an internal affairs investigation the following Monday. The district attorney's office opened a parallel criminal investigation the same day, and that's when the real story came out. Investigators pulled Craig Dutton's personnel file. What they found was not a single bad morning from an otherwise decent officer. It was a pattern. A long, ugly, carefully buried pattern. 14 formal complaints over 6 years, every single one filed by a person of color. Excessive force during a traffic stop, complaint dismissed. Racial slurs during a pedestrian stop, complaint dismissed. Illegal search of a vehicle driven by a black teenager, complaint dismissed. A Latino shop owner shoved against his own counter during a routine inspection, complaint dismissed. 14 complaints, 14 investigations, 14 times the department looked the other way. Each one had been resolved internally with no discipline, no retraining, and no record in his active file. They were buried in a storage room in the basement of the precinct, paper files, not digital, as if someone had made a deliberate decision to keep them off the system. The DA presented the findings to a grand jury. The indictment came down within 2 weeks. Craig Dutton was charged with assault, violation of civil rights under federal statute, false imprisonment, and conduct unbecoming a sworn officer of the law. The trial lasted 4 days. It didn't need more than 2. The prosecution's case was airtight. They had Terrence's phone footage, unbroken, time-stamped, audio clear enough to hear every word Dutton said. They had Denise Coleman's professional broadcast footage from a second angle. They had 3 additional bystander videos, each capturing details the others missed. They had the testimony of General Raymond Hollister, who sat in the witness chair in full dress uniform and described what he saw when he arrived at the memorial that morning. His voice never wavered. His answers were precise. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that Miles had been non-compliant, Hollister looked at him and said, "I have commanded soldiers in combat for 35 years. I know what non-compliance looks like." That man was the most compliant person on that memorial. They had Miles's complete military service record entered into evidence. 3 combat tours, 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with Valor, an honorable discharge, a letter of commendation signed by a brigadier general, a service history so clean and distinguished that the prosecutor let it sit on the screen for a full minute without saying a word. The defense tried everything. Dutton was following procedure. Miles was uncooperative. The situation was ambiguous. The language was taken out of context. The footage destroyed every argument before it finished forming. You could watch the jury's faces as each clip played. They didn't look confused. They didn't look conflicted. They looked like people who had already made up their minds and were waiting for permission to say so. The verdict came back in under 3 hours. Guilty. All counts. The judge handed down the sentence without ceremony. 5 years in federal prison. Permanent ban from law enforcement in any jurisdiction in the United States. Mandatory registration as a civil rights offender. No possibility of early parole for the first 36 months. Dutton stood in the courtroom with his hands clasped in front of him. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder. Dutton didn't react. He stared at the table in front of him like a man watching the last light go out. Miles was not in the courtroom for the sentencing. He was at Sullivan House, his nonprofit, helping a formerly homeless Marine fill out a housing application. When Denise Coleman called him for a comment, he said, "I'm glad justice was served. I hope it doesn't stop with one officer." It didn't. The Department of Justice opened a broader investigation into the Ridgedale Police Department. The findings triggered a federal consent decree, mandatory reforms to hiring practices, use of force policies, complaint review processes, and officer training. An independent monitor was appointed to oversee compliance for the next 5 years. Captain Brendan Nolan was promoted to lead the reform effort. The city council cited her decisive action on the morning of the incident as the reason. In her first address to the department, she said, "What happened at that memorial didn't start that morning. It started years ago. Every time a complaint was filed and we looked the other way. That ends now." 3 other officers with similar complaint histories were placed on administrative leave pending review. 2 eventually resigned. 1 was terminated. The Ridgedale City Council issued a formal public apology to Miles Sullivan. They allocated emergency funding to Sullivan House, enough to expand from 1 location to 3 across the state of Virginia. The council president read the apology at a public meeting. Miles attended. He sat in the back row. He nodded once when it was over. He did not speak. The civil rights community held the case up as an example, not of the system working, but of what it took for the system to work. A 3-star general had to physically show up. A teenager had to have the courage to keep recording. A journalist had to be in the right place at the right time. The evidence had to be overwhelming and undeniable. And even then, it almost didn't happen. 1 year later, Miles Sullivan drove his old Chevy pickup back to the Ridgedale Veterans Memorial. Same time, same jacket, same letter in his breast pocket. The letter was different now. The ink had bled and faded from the puddle water. Some of Danny's words were gone forever, smudged into ghosts of sentences that Miles could only fill in from memory. He had thought about rewriting it, copying the words onto fresh paper, but that felt wrong. The damage was part of the story now. The letter carried two wars, the one Danny fought in Afghanistan, and the one Miles fought on American soil. Terrence sat in the passenger seat. He was 17 now, taller, quieter in a way that wasn't shy anymore. It was steady. He had started his senior year with a stack of college brochures on his desk. Criminal justice, every single one. When Miles asked him why, Terrence said, "Because, Dad, somebody's got to be the officer you deserved that morning." Miles didn't have a response for that. He just squeezed his son's shoulder and held on for a long time. They walked to the wall together. The memorial looked the same. Granite, bronze, flags. But something was different. Along the base of the wall, someone had laid a row of fresh flowers. A small, handwritten card tucked between the stems read, "For SFC Sullivan and all who serve in silence." Miles didn't know who left it. He never found out. He pressed his finger to Danny's name. The carved letters were cold and familiar. He closed his eyes and stood there for a long time. No one interrupted him. A few people walking past recognized him. They nodded. One man, an older white veteran in a Korea cap, stopped and saluted. Miles returned it. That was enough. Sullivan House had grown beyond anything Miles imagined. 3 locations across Virginia now, over 200 veterans housed and enrolled in job training every year. The waiting list was long, but the doors stayed open. Miles worked there 6 days a week, not behind a desk, but on the floor, helping men and women fill out paperwork, driving them to interviews, sitting with them on bad nights when the memories got loud. The governor of Virginia awarded him a civilian commendation in a quiet ceremony at the State House. Miles wore a suit. He pinned his medals on the outside for the photo. Then he took them off and put them back in the velvet pouch. He kept them in his inner pocket, same as always. Not for show. General Hollister retired from active duty that spring. In his retirement speech at Fort Liberty, he mentioned Miles by name. He called him the bravest man I have ever known, who never once asked to be recognized for it. After retirement, he joined the board of Sullivan House. He and Miles spoke on the phone every Sunday morning. They never talked about the memorial. They talked about football, fishing, and which veterans on the wait list needed help the most. Craig Dutton served his sentence at a federal facility in West Virginia. Upon release, he was permanently barred from law enforcement. A civil lawsuit brought by Miles resulted in a significant financial settlement. Miles donated every cent to a veterans' mental health services fund. When a reporter asked him why he didn't keep the money, he said, "That money came from pain. I wanted it to go toward healing." Denise Coleman won a regional journalism award for her coverage of the case. She continued reporting on policing and civil rights in Virginia for the next decade. She never let the story die. So I have to ask you, what would you have done if you were one of those bystanders that morning, setting up chairs, walking your dog, watching a man get humiliated at a war memorial? Would you have spoken up? Or would you have looked away? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. If this story hit you somewhere deep, smash that like button so more people can see it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit that bell, because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about people who get knocked down and refuse to stay there. Miles Sullivan didn't need a general to tell the world who he was. He knew exactly who he was. He always did. But on that cold November morning in Ridgedale, Virginia, the world finally saw it too.
Myro Sullivan didn't need a general to tell the world who he was, but what haunts me, what if Hollister had arrived 5 minutes later? 14 complaints, all from people of color, on berries in the basement. It took a teenager shaking hands, and a journalist camper, and a 3-star general, all at the same place, same time, for the system to finally work. And after everything, the slur, the handcuff, then his last letter stormed into a puddle. Myro donated every cent of his settlement to veteran mental health. That's not a man fighting for revenge. That's a man fighting so the next veteran won't have to sit on cold concrete and be called a monkey for honoring his best friend. But I need you to sit with this for a second. If your dignity was stripped away in a place you to honor your sacrifice by the very country you bled for, would you still have the grace to give back? And if you were watching it happen to someone else, would your silence make you any different from that call? Drop your honest answer below. Share this if it moves you. And hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every single week. Terrence Sullivan wants to study criminal justice. His words, somebody got to be the official that deserves that money. That is gets it. Do we?